dietitian, and I have a business here called the Travelling Dietitian. So I travel, which basically means I travel to visit people in their homes or offices for consultations, but also because I've travelled around a lot, so it's all about kind of eating well wherever you live in the world. So I'm just here very informally, so I don't mean to just kind of stand up in front of you and talk, but just to talk about, for a few reasons. First of all, just to let you know that I think it's in 4 weeks' time, I'm running an Introduction to Solids workshop here. So that's going to be a 2-hour workshop for anyone who's just started solids or looking to be introducing solids soonish. So it's a 2-hour workshop, but there'll be a break, and what I'm going to be covering in that, and I'll cover little bits of it today as well, or whatever you would like to talk about today actually, but I won't cover it all today. I'll have to leave some for the workshop. But basically it's a general introduction to introducing solids to your baby. So talking about the most recent guidelines that have come out, which are 2013 guidelines that came out of Australia. They're kind of internationally the most recent guidelines that have come out. So just talking about what they cover and why. And things like essential nutrients that you need to focus on for your growing baby. So particularly for the first 6 months, from when they're kind of 6 months to 1 year old. Then I'll talk more about obviously first foods, what to introduce and when, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about that today as well, but just not in as much detail. What to introduce and when and why and how, and everything. Because are all of you first-time parents?
I've got a 3-year-old boy.
Okay, right, so you've done it before. So that helps, but it still changes, doesn't it? And every baby is very different. But so a little bit more about that, because I've got a 17-month-old boy myself, and luckily I started running these workshops just a few months after I'd introduced solids to him. So I had, so obviously when you have your own, you've just got to pick one personal experience. And it's challenging. And as I was saying to you earlier, it's really, you put so much pressure on that first food that you introduce to them, and it's such a big event. And my husband, we made sure you do it on a Saturday, and my husband's there, and right, we're going to do it at 12 o'clock on the dot just to get this routine going. And oh gosh, it's such a disaster. And because I put so much pressure on myself that, okay, I'm going to introduce carrot because I just wanted to try something like that. I'm a dietitian, my son's going to love it. He threw it straight back at me, as much as he could throw at the time. But it was so disappointing, and I was really I just built it up so much in my mind. So that's probably the first thing I would say, is don't put any pressure on it, because more than likely it's such an odd thing. Can you imagine having milk all your life and then suddenly having this solid stuff that you have to swallow, and it's just not easy. And even just the concept of a spoon and that sort of thing is also different. So just don't put too much pressure on it. But it is overwhelming, because it's really, I think you feel a lot of responsibility introducing food, that you want to start the right way. And I really like talking to new parents about this, because it's such a great time to get your child into developing really good eating habits from the very beginning. And I so often I see fussy eating children, who are maybe quite a bit older, and particularly once they get to say 6 or 7, they're just more and more challenging. So if you can get them right from the very beginning, that really helps, I think. Just developing eating healthy approaches to food and eating and meal times and things like that. So that's also something I'll cover, is kind of how to develop a healthy eating behaviour from the start, from the very beginning. So that's, again, I'll talk about it in more detail in the workshop, but it's things like having set meal times for a child, especially once they get to toddler age. It's really helpful for them to know when their meal's coming, and also how much of it they're going to have. And there's this thing called the division of responsibility in feeding, and it's basically your responsibility of a parent is to provide nutritious food at the right times in the right environment, and that's where your involvement stops. It's totally up to the child to decide how much they're going to eat, and that's a really big thing for a parent to have to concede to, I think, because it's very, parents get so stressed about making sure that their child's getting enough, and getting enough nutrients and that sort of thing, and I think it becomes a really stressful thing for many children and parents at mealtime, and that just makes the problem worse. So I guess that's probably the most important thing as a parent that you can do, is provide the right food at the right times, but leave it totally up to your child to work out how much of it they're going to eat. Because when we were young, we were really good at knowing how much we needed and when to stop. But we lose that so much as we get older, and we just eat out of habit, out of boredom, for so many other reasons other than whether we're hungry or not. And children are so great at knowing when they're hungry and when they're full. So leave it up to them to a certain extent. Obviously there are exceptions to that rule, but hopefully none of yours will be an exception to that rule. So I'll talk more about that, a bit about allergies and intolerance as well. So I'm just telling you now what I'm covering in this talk, and then I'm happy to talk about whatever you would like to talk about nutrition-wise after that. So allergies and intolerances, just a little brief kind of introduction to that. I think things in the world of allergies have changed so much over the years, because I think, probably more like 5 or 10 years ago, if somebody was pregnant, they were advised to not eat nuts during their pregnancy because they thought that would increase the risk of nut allergy in their unborn child. But now it's the exact opposite, and now we're saying that try to eat as many nuts as you can during pregnancy, because that may well help reduce the risk of developing an allergy. There was actually a study done a couple of years ago of about 11,500 pregnant women, so a big sample size, and they found that those who ate plenty of nuts during their pregnancy and breastfeeding as well were less likely to have a child with any kind of allergy, not just a nut allergy, but any kind of allergy. So the thing about pregnancy and breastfeeding is trying to have as many different, expose your body and your baby to as many different flavours and types of foods as you possibly can during that time, because definitely a lot of flavours are passed through the breast milk for those who are breastfeeding. So if they, you're listening to me so intently, thank you. It's such a good member of the audience. And yeah, so just try to expose them to as much as you possibly can as early on as possible. And so as far as allergies and intolerances go, we'll talk about that more as far as introducing solids. But generally, we used to say, there was a real stepwise process in introducing solids to your child, but that's actually, we don't need to do that anymore. It's pretty much feed your child anything from about the age of 6 months. So things like wheat we used to delay because they thought it would increase an allergy risk, but now we know that there's a real window for wheat, and because wheat's such a buzzword in the field of nutrition at the moment, that people who, so what we say is to try to introduce wheat or gluten of some sort between 6 and 7 months. And what the studies are showing is if you do it too early, then it will put too much pressure on their guts. But if you do it too late, so after 7 months, it will also, it just takes longer to adapt. So it could increase the chance of an intolerance, like a wheat or a gluten intolerance. So, and that's the case with a lot of things as well. But I'll talk more about, you do need to do it in certain steps, just so that you're not introducing all these new foods at once. You want to make sure that you're just introducing, 1 or 2 at a time, so that if there is an issue, then you'll be able to identify what it is that's causing the problem. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail. Another one is what useful equipment to buy or to have, that's when you're starting to prepare meals. So you were asking kind of how much food they should be having when you first give it to them. Really, they're only going to have a teaspoon or so at a time, a teaspoon or a tablespoon probably, but probably the first few it's just going to be a teaspoon. So, and then once you get to know, it's a great idea just to have an ice cube tray or those little baby food trays that you just can, if you're giving puree food, puree up some food and put it in the ice cubes and then just take them out one at a time, because one of those ice cubes is a good amount in the first few weeks of from introducing solids to a child. So I'll kind of go through as they get a bit older the kind of quantities that they may need as they're getting a bit older. But on that note about purees, it's really big. Everybody kind of wants to know about baby-led weaning at the moment. Do you all know about baby-led weaning? No? So basically the traditional approach to feeding a child is all about, starting with purees, and then as they get older, gradually, increasing the texture of that. But baby-led weaning is, it's just a term really, but a lady's made a lot of money from that term. But it's basically just, offering finger food from day one. And there is some research to say that starting with finger food and skipping the puree phase can mean that they develop better eating behaviours from the beginning, or they might just be less fussy. Because sometimes, food for a child is a very textural thing, and if they go straight into, being independent or being able to pick something up themselves, and also if they're not being force-fed, with a spoon or something like that, then they might be better eaters in the long run. But they're very loose studies, and it's totally a personal thing, and it's totally what you're comfortable with. And I think a bit of a balance between the two is a good way to do it, to offer some purees, and then from the beginning, maybe always offer a little soft finger of carrot or whatever you're giving them. If you're giving them some mashed banana, give them a little piece of banana that they might just, it's good for their development, just they might want to start playing with it and trying to pick it up, or it's just good exposure to real food for them from the beginning as well. And it might be a month or so before they even take any interest in it, but at least they're being exposed to it from the beginning. And you want to get them independently feeding as early as possible. Not saying at 6 months they're going to be feeding themselves necessarily, but people who really rave about baby-led weaning say that their children will eat anything. And the thing about baby-led weaning is you don't prepare specific food for the child. They pretty much start with family food from the beginning. Now that scares a lot of parents, and there is the scare about choking hazards and things like that. So it's totally up to you and what you feel comfortable with. But I'm going to talk more in the workshop about pros and cons of each, because there are definite pros and cons of each option. So whatever suits you, but you will read, if you're reading online, particularly about introducing solids, you'll read a lot about baby-led weaning. Then, talking more about eating behaviours and how to do that from the beginning, and then we might go through a few case studies at the end if we have some time, and then just a list of resources. So there are some really, really great websites out there with recipes. There are some good cookbooks, so some good recipes, cookbooks, just forums as well, because you definitely can't believe everything you read on the internet, but some sources are better than others, so and some books that might be useful and that sort of thing. So, that's an introduction to what the workshop's going to be about. So if you want to talk about any of that, then I'm happy to, but if any of you want to talk about more about nutrition during breastfeeding, are you all breastfeeding? Yeah, so nutrition during breastfeeding is something that I talk about quite a lot as well, just because I think a lot of the time people tend to neglect themselves during while they're breastfeeding, and all their energy goes into their baby. So, so what interests you guys, or do any of you have any particular questions, or did you come here to learn about anything specific nutrition-wise? Interests?
The only thing that I had a question about was dairy. Because everyone always talks about dairy and whether you should be having it if you're breastfeeding, or you shouldn't, or is it, does that affect the reflux or an allergic reaction to it? And I just wondered if it's the dairy issue is the same as it is with meat.
Yeah. Are any of you avoiding dairy because you've been advised to? No. Okay, it's a real tricky one, and I have to say, doctors here are really ready to say to someone cut out dairy. There is definitely there can be a link for those who have babies with serious reflux, there can definitely be a link with maybe dairy or soy intake, but not always. And I think I think it's probably worth trying. What you need to do is, if you do try it, if you do have quite a refluxy baby, and you've ruled out and you've kind of tried sitting them upright after a feed and a few different things like that to help rule out the reflux or anything that's kind of associated with a mild reflux, could try a dairy or soy-free diet, but it needs to be for at least kind of 2 to 4 weeks, because it takes that long for the proteins to kind of be eliminated from both yours and your baby's bodies. It's hard though, because dairy is in a lot of things that we just don't think about.
Everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So so that was what I was going to say, is it's really hard to get your calcium through non-dairy sources. It's definitely possible. And the problem is that children who are intolerant or allergic to dairy are often intolerant or allergic to soy as well. So if they're not, what you probably want to do is do one at a time, so you know. And then if they're allergic to both, then you plant sources or non-dairy sources of calcium include things like tin salmon with the bones in. So and you can mash the bones up in the tin salmon, and that is a really good source of calcium. So a small tin of salmon with mashed bones is equivalent to about a glass of milk, calcium-wise. So as breastfeeding mums, your requirements of calcium are about 1,000 milligrams a day, which is about 4 serves of dairy. And a serve is about 1 glass of milk, so about that much milk, or a similar amount of yogurt, or say a matchbox-sized slice of cheese. So as a breastfeeding mum, are you taking supplements, any of you, as breastfeeding?
Yeah, just calcium. Well, I take it on and off the calcium, but I wasn't sure what I needed to.
Yeah. Calcium, I think if you're not getting 4 serves of dairy, I would suggest taking a supplement that contains calcium. Like a lot of the breastfeeding and pregnancy supplements do have some calcium in it, which is enough. Because you need 1,000 milligrams a day, and the reason is because you're losing calcium through your bones because of your change in estrogen levels. So it is an important time to be getting enough of your requirements. So, but back to the food varieties, there's tin salmon, things like almonds. Almonds are quite high in calcium, and sesame seeds as well. So something like hummus, which is made from tahini, which is just blended sesame seeds, is a good source of calcium. Things like broccoli contain some calcium, but really you need 3 cups of broccoli to be equivalent to 1 cup of milk. It's a lot of broccoli, yeah. So if you're going to get it all from broccoli, you need about 12 cups of broccoli a day, which isn't going to be good on your digestive tract. So, otherwise, you can have, for you personally, you could have a fortified non-dairy milk, so an almond milk or goat's milk or oat milk, but many of them aren't fortified with calcium. That's the problem with them. So if you are going to use those as a source of dairy, then you need, as a source of calcium, you need to make sure it's fortified, otherwise there's no point. Yeah, and so what you want to aim for is about, I don't know if you remember this, but about 120 milligrams per 100 mils of a milk or whatever, as a good source. But then if you see no change, this is without medication or anything like that, within 4 weeks, then it's not going to be dairy. Yeah. But it's hard, especially cakes and biscuits and all sorts of things that just keep you awake. That keep you awake, exactly. And that's the thing when you're breastfeeding. I think a lot of people feel really guilty eating, and I know when I was breastfeeding, had such sweet cravings. I've never really been into sweet food, but my sweet cravings were just huge when I was breastfeeding. Energy requirements are just so much greater than usual. So you require everybody's very different, but at least 300 or 400 calories more a day when you're breastfeeding than when you're not. And I think when you're tired, you do automatically go for sweet things. I guess what I always say to people is try to meet all of your nutrient requirements first before you go for the sweet things, but then once you've achieved all of that, then go for it. You know, you need some extra calories, you need a bit of energy, you need something to give you a bit of enjoyment as well, you know, if you really enjoy it. Obviously you don't want to go overboard, because if you do too much of this while you're breastfeeding, it does make it a lot harder later if you're wanting to lose your baby weight. But the other thing as well is just everybody's so different the way their bodies react to breastfeeding as far as weight goes. Some people, as soon as they start breastfeeding, they're back to their pre-pregnancy weight, you know, within a few weeks. But others don't lose weight until they stop breastfeeding. So it just totally depends on your body. So don't put pressure on yourself that, you know, everyone around you has lost all their baby weight and you haven't lost anything, you know, since you've had the baby. Because many people that I see, as soon as they stop, they start losing the weight. So it just depends on how your body metabolizes food and calories and how it conserves calories. And some bodies just want to hold on to, you know, they know they're requiring so many more calories, they just want to hold on to them just in case. So don't be concerned about any of that. But I think while you are breastfeeding, it's really important to be meeting all of your nutrient requirements. So that's like getting enough starchy foods. It's very popular these days to be cutting out carbs, but as a breastfeeding mum, that's the last thing that you should be doing. You definitely need them as your source of fuel, because you know, so each meal should be based around some kind of starchy carbohydrate of some sort. But I think the thing to do is to go for the good types of carbohydrates. So going for low GI carbohydrates. Do you know what I mean by low GI carbohydrates? Does anyone want me to explain that? No. So yeah, and that's where things like oats are great, and I mean oats can also. Oh yeah, sure, go for it. Oats are also great because they, you know, can help to stimulate milk production. So oats, and that's where I think, you know, so these look like oat cookies, I think. Yeah, oat cookies.
Some they're lactation cookies.
Sorry?
They're lactation.
Oh right, yes, yeah. Yes, so they're good ones. Yeah, very nutritious. Very nutritious, the lactation cookies. But so if you can incorporate a low GI carbohydrate as part of your snacks and meals, so oats, things like lentils and pulses and chickpeas are really, really great because they're filling, they're high in fibre, and they're going to keep your blood sugar levels steady. Because when you're tired, what you need is to avoid swings in your blood sugar levels. So you want to avoid the highs and lows. And so if you try and have a low GI food, you know, consistently throughout the day, then your blood sugar levels will remain a lot more stable, and you'll be able to deal with that lack of sleep a bit better. But things like, do you know other low GI foods? Brown rice, yeah. Yeah, it is actually, it's quite interesting because brown rice is quite low GI, but even lower than brown rice is basmati rice. So just the white Indian style rice is lower GI than brown rice. Quinoa, yeah, quinoa is low GI and high in protein, which is good. Pasta as well. So even though everybody thinks pasta is the worst thing you can have, it's actually really low GI. The problem is we just eat too much of it. So, you know, a handful of pasta keeps it low GI, but if you have a big plate full, that's when it's, yeah, going to put your blood sugar levels up and the weight as well. Things like dairy products. So when you're breastfeeding, dairy products are such a great snack, partly because you need to meet your calcium requirements, but also because they're low GI and they're filling, so they're just going to keep you going. So I think one of the best things you can have, best snacks you can have, is a smoothie, like a fruit smoothie made from milk, yogurt, some fresh fruit, fresh frozen fruit to make it nice and cold and slushy. So it's ticking a lot of boxes because you're also getting the fluid that, you know, the extra fluid that you need while you're breastfeeding as well. So when you're breastfeeding, you do need about 700 or 800 mils more of fluid than when you're not breastfeeding. So obviously, yeah, always having water by your side and making it just a habit to always eat and breastfeed with some water or fluid of some sort. But it's hard, I think, sometimes to meet that extra 700 or 800 mils of fluid. Does anyone struggle with that? Yeah, I find that it's just a real habit thing. Unless you're in the habit of doing it, then
just stuff like coffee dehydrate you. It sort of makes you negative.
Yeah, it's a diuretic. Tea and coffee are a diuretic. I mean, you can still count them as part of your fluid intake, but yeah, they are a diuretic, so they make you go to the toilet more. Yeah. So you can count them, but I'd probably only count half of it. Like a coffee, half the coffee. I mean, something like a coffee is no harm in having some coffee while you're breastfeeding.
I need a coffee through the day.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And if you have a milky coffee, that's an added extra way to get your dairy.
I heard that the caffeine affects your letdown or something.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Ginny? I'll ask you one.
I usually say if you drink coffee or any caffeine, just up your water.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you just have to check for the baby sensitivity because they're all different. So some of them will be, because not even caffeine, some people take, what's that? Not bird's nest, what's the other thing that they... Chicken essence. And the babies don't sleep after having that. So you just have to watch how your baby reacts.
And that's with everything really, that's with all foods. And some babies are sensitive to garlic and chili and
or lentils and chickpeas, and then they get very gassy. Yeah.
But some are, but many aren't as well. So it totally depends. It's something you really have to just try and monitor. And if you're not sure, if you feel like your baby's particularly refluxy or gassy or upset constantly, it's good to keep a food diary so that you can look back. And because, you know, it pretty much does come through the breast milk relatively quickly, within a few hours.
Like if you have a coffee, is it the next feed or the second?
Caffeine is at its peak in your blood 30 to 60 minutes after you've had a coffee. So yeah, so it would be actually the next. That's in your blood, but yeah, it would be in the next feed. Yeah, that it would pass through to the blood, to the breast milk. Sorry. And so on that note, alcohol is another one. It's always a hot topic when you're breastfeeding. It's a similar thing with the alcohol. So it basically takes. There's a really good table actually. I've got it here on the Australian Breastfeeding Association website. And it's a really good table. Basically, you just look at your weight, and it tells you how long it takes each drink to pass through your breast milk. So generally, you know, a 65 kilo woman, it will take 1 hour 50. So pretty much 2 hours for one standard drink to pass through your breast milk, you know, to be passed out of your breast milk, to be metabolized basically. So we always say if you're going to have a drink, have it as soon after you've finished breastfeeding as you can, so that you're giving it time to pass through before you have to feed next.
How does that work then? It just doesn't.
It's just broken down. It's like all food, it's just metabolized. Yeah, and so it's just not in your bloodstream anymore. But when it's in your bloodstream, it does pass through.
I had a coffee before my class.
She's not sleeping. So it's about 2 hours for one drink and about almost kind of 3.75 hours for 2 drinks.
Okay.
So you just have to plan for it so you can have one. But on that note though, it's so hard to know what is a standard drink. Do you know how much it takes to get like for 2 hours? Yeah, so you can say a small glass of white wine, but that's very different to everybody who pours it. There's such a different, I should have brought a bottle actually, but it's only 100 mils.
Wouldn't it change depending on the percentage of
Alcohol?
wine?
Yeah, most wine is 13 to 14% alcohol, or probably 12 to 13% actually. So it is totally dependent on the percentage alcohol. And so 100 mils of wine is about that much. So it's not a huge amount. I know. And it's one kind of stubby of beer, so because it's lower percentage, it's about 300 mils of beer, or if it's a spirit, it's 10 mils.
Oh, so 300 mils of beer, that makes sense as cider.
Yeah. They're similar alcohol percentages.
That's only 4 to 5%.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, those bottles, the smaller bottles of beer.
Really crave cider, like
You just time it.
yeah.
Just time it. And I totally think it's fine to have a drink. I think it's quite important sometimes if it's going to relax you. It relaxes you and makes you deal with the next cry a bit better. And it's fine as long as you're not. And it's obviously it's not going to pass through the breast milk in the same concentration as you drink it. It's obviously a lot more diluted. But you just don't.
A question about nutrition for the babies. Because when I was doing all the reading, there was a lot of talk about how kids generally don't have enough iron. That's why you feed them meat and that.
Yep.
So I just want to know like whether it's case. I mean, I'm past the stage my kid's 1.
Okay.
But I mean, I still wonder whether I give him enough iron. He has an egg like every other day, and now that he's 1, we're starting him on pureed meat. So I just want to know in general, like, what
so
is that issue?
you can introduce meat from the very beginning, as soon as you start introducing solids. And yeah, it's a big problem actually, children not getting enough iron. I would suggest at least once or twice a week, if they do eat meat, I would suggest offering them red meat of some sort, so either beef, lamb or pork, once or twice a week, if you can, because there are basically 2 types of iron. There's a heme iron that's in red meat, and that's the one that we absorb the best. But non-heme iron is in a lot of foods, but we just don't absorb it as well. So that's in things like egg or lentils or pulses or chicken or fish. Even breakfast cereals, have some non-heme iron. So the best way to absorb them even more is to combine them with some vitamin C of some sort. So for example, lentils. So a vegetarian child, or they're not eating much meat, if they're having lentils or something, replacing the meat, always try and include some source of vitamin C with it. So it might be some tomatoes with the lentils or chickpeas, or if they're having some egg, try to have some carrots or red capsicum, or or offer a bit of fruit straight afterwards, like some orange, or a lot of fruit has vitamin C in it, or some kiwi fruit's really high in vitamin C. So that's a good way to increase their absorption, but I think at least once to twice a week, I think you should be offering red meat.
And that should be enough. That should be more or less enough.
Yeah, that should be enough. Yeah, if they've generally got a well-balanced diet, because it does also depend if they're getting enough other nutrients, that helps to increase iron absorption, and some things reduce iron absorption. So for us as adults, I'm sure your 1-year-old's not doing this, but drinking tea or coffee with a meal reduces your iron absorption, and also having too much bran, kind of that processed bran kind of can reduce the absorption as well.
And how about for like DHA? Do you need a supplement with DHA? I mean, because some of our friends are doing that. I'm not sure that should follow.
Yeah, you shouldn't need to. Again, I would suggest that all children from the age of 6 months have, maybe not quite 6 months, but at least 7 or 8 months, have a source of oily fish once or twice a week. So salmon being the best, just because it's probably the easiest, but salmon or sardines or anchovies or one of those oily fish, once or twice a week should be enough for them to meet their omega-3 requirements. Yeah, but if they're having, they or you are having omega-3s less than that, or oily fish less than that, then I would suggest taking a supplement. An omega-3 supplement that includes EPA and DHA, that's got about 500 milligrams of omega-3s in it. If you need more details, my card is here and you can email me and let you know. Yeah, but it's a really important one actually, and that's something that's really easy to introduce to babies, is some tinned salmon or fresh salmon just mashed up and mixed with something Like one of my favourite meals for my boy was mixing up some avocado, some couscous, so just because it takes 2 minutes to cook, and some mashed tinned salmon. And it's just a really nutritious meal. It's soft. It's a bit more textured, obviously. It's not the first thing that you want to offer them, but it's really nutritious.
Sorry, don't mean to hog the discussion, but because you mentioned avocado, I just have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, strange thing about my boy is that every time I give him avocado, he somehow ends up throwing up at the end of the day.
Yeah, right.
But it's such
It
a
is quite rich.
non-allergenic.
Yeah, it's just quite rich, yeah, because it's very high in fat. Sometimes, I mean, a lot of babies are fine with it as a first food even, you know, some people are quite keen on giving it from the very beginning. But it is quite rich, so if he's used to maybe more bland food and maybe not a fatty food, so things like salmon as well is quite rich, so he's okay with that, yeah.
So
It wouldn't be allergenic, or it wouldn't be an intolerance, it's probably just the richness of it, or the heaviness of it for him.
so small amounts.
Yeah, and mixed with other things, probably. Yeah, mixed with something else just to tone it down a little bit.
Yeah, you mentioned that you can pretty much give anything for 6 months. Is there anything that you really shouldn't?
Yes. Yeah. You can use cow's milk in foods. So if you were making porridge or something like that, you could use cow's milk to make it. But you don't want to give it as a drink until they're closer to 12 months. I mean, yes, ideally until after they're 12 months. So you shouldn't introduce cow's milk. Also honey. So honey shouldn't be given until after they're 1 because of their So that's fine. Honey, yeah, just because it contains botulism that could, bacteria basically that us as adults can deal with, but babies can't. Salt, so there's no need to be adding salt, even when they're older. There's no need to be adding salt to their food. So definitely for the first 6 months, at least, I would, try not to use stocks and things like that, or sauces. Just because it's too high for their tiny kidneys to be able to process. And even, in their toddler years, they should, and we should all be having very, limited amount of salt anyway, but you just need to be more conscious. And, even things like, I would still, for a young baby, not use things like tinned tomatoes, so try and just use the fresh tomatoes, just because there's always quite a bit of salt added to tinned foods. So honey, salt, sugar, and cow's milk. It's the sugar that you want to hold off. I mean, really, I think sugar you just want to hold off as long as you can, because once they get a taste for it, they're going to love it. Yeah, exactly. They've got such an affinity to sweet foods, and sweet tasting things. I would avoid fruit juice as well. There's no need for a baby and even a toddler to be having fruit juice realistically. It's so concentrated and so high in natural teeth. It's not good for their teeth. So they're the main things. Yeah. Everything else can be introduced early, and so this is the thing with meat. You can definitely introduce meat from 6 months. I wouldn't introduce meat before 6 months, but from 6 months you can introduce. I wouldn't give it as a first food either, and start slowly and build up. Slowly with just a bland vegetable or a bland fruit, and one at a time, and gradually build up. But something like some pureed chicken or pureed fish or minced beef or something like that is fine. Yeah, so it's good. And so once they're 6 months, the iron stores drop quite significantly, and your breast milk is not a good enough source of iron for them. So they need to, start getting some meat soon. This is one reason why, time-wise, for introducing solids, it totally depends on the baby. Some might be really ready for it at 4 months, some might be not ready at all until 6 months. So it totally depends. And if they're starting to really look at food and watch the food go to your mouth all the time, that's a good sign. If they're not satisfied by their milk, they always seem to be looking for a bit more. They might just be hungry and need something a bit more substantial. And as I was saying to you earlier, if they can sit up, so stay in a high chair or a chair of some sort without flopping forward. That's a good sign as well. And there's also the tongue reflex. If they're able to push food out, then they're more ready for food as well. But yeah, it totally depends on the child, and guidelines are sometime between 4 and 6 months. And so, but the beauty of starting a bit earlier, I feel, you know, maybe around 5 months if they're ready, is that you can introduce things more slowly. You can be a bit more slow about it. But once they're 6 months, they really do need to be getting things like iron straight away. And that's where, you know, in the past everyone's really focused on iron fortified rice cereal. So there are totally two schools of thought with rice cereal. Some people think it's the worst thing in the world and you should never poison your child with rice cereal. But, you know, it's totally your decision. I think there's nothing wrong with rice cereal, and I think there's definitely a place for it, particularly if you're introducing solids before 6 months. Then I think it's an important source of iron.
Yeah.
Because, well, carbohydrate phobes, they think it's a really bad thing and think that because it's processed, so, you know, it's not like it's whole grain rice that you're giving your child, so it's really broken down, and they think that it's, you know, you're giving your child processed food from day one. Which I don't agree with, and that's why I think it's totally a personal thing. There's nothing wrong with it, and I think it's a really wise way because it's so bland and it's a good source of iron for them, and it's a good way to introduce different flavours into the diet. So you can add a bit of mashed banana to some rice cereal, and you can add a bit of pureed pear or pureed apple or a bit of pureed carrot or something like that, and it's a really easy way to slowly introduce flavours to them.
It's a like rice pudding sort of porridge or something.
It's just a powder basically. It's basically ground up rice, and people do think, well, you may as well just make your own. So it's kind of it's just ground up pulverized rice really. But the problem with making your own is that it's not fortified with iron, so there's not much point really. You know, you may as well just cook rice and blend it up and give something else, or give something else totally. So I think the benefit of it is the iron source.
In terms of food preparation, what are the essential things? Just a whiz, you know, to...
Yeah, I think the essential thing is, if you're going to go the pureed approach, a spoon, like a long spoon that's quite shallow, so that you can feed them. That's okay, thank you, bye. And if you're giving pureed food, yeah, a food processor or a blender. I mean, those sticks are great.
Yeah.
The stick blenders are really easy. And it doesn't, you know, if you steam an apple or something like that, that's going to last a long time. You know, that makes quite a lot of puree, and it's probably going to last, you know, at least 7 or 8 meals. Yeah. So, so you don't need much. So I think those ice cube trays are good, so that you can put things in the freezer, freeze things and take them out. I think, yeah, the shallow spoon, a blender of some sort.
So you're saying you don't even need to puree if you don't want to.
If you're taking the baby-led weaning approach, which is just giving finger food.
How would they eat like a piece of beef? Would you have to give them nuts?
Yeah, well, no. Real baby-led weaning proponents, is that the word? It's amazing what the baby can do with their gums. Often what they do is just supplement. My main issue with baby-led weaning is that it's just really hard to get certain nutrients into them. It's hard to get, it's really hard to give them something like yogurt, for example, because, you know, there's only so much there. And, you know, they're just not capable of being able to do that with something like yogurt. It's, and also iron, yeah, I think it is a lot harder to get sources of iron into them. That's where I think it's a bit of a combination of the two.
Nutrition yesterday, I was nutrition, and she said it's really important not to give them too much food to keep them milk over the first year. Yeah. So
always give food milk first, and it's a good, and that's the timing of it is can be difficult, but you want to make sure that they're not too hungry because you don't want them to just be agitated and not want to try anything. But you want them to be a little bit hungry so that they're willing to try it. So it's always good to do a feed of maybe half an hour. It depends how often you're feeding, but if you're feeding say every 3 hours or so, if you feed them and then half an hour to an hour later, maybe give them a taste of food. And really in the first 6 months it's all about exposure and taste, and if you're still breastfeeding, they're getting a lot of nutrients, through that anyway, so it's just exposure. And you want to start at 1 meal a day and then gradually increase. There's no need. The thing is, and I know myself, I just got excited. And thought, oh, I'm going to introduce another meal, and then you get 3 meals before I knew it. But you don't need to do that, because they're not having it for sole nutrition. They've still definitely got the breast milk. So I think just timing it so that they're not too hungry and they're not too full. Are there any other questions? Well, the workshop's on the 23rd, I think it is.
Yep.
Saturday.
23rd, 10 to 12.
Saturday, 10 to 12. Yeah, here. And you're welcome to bring August, yes. So you're welcome to bring your husbands or helpers or whoever. And I think it's all through you, Eve, is it? All through you?
Yeah, it will be on Facebook and everything like that. We'll have it on the events and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Will you run it again later? Will you be doing more than one? Or
Yeah, we could arrange something.
Yeah.
If you're away, we're thinking.
Yeah.
Sounds like
When would be a good time for you? We'll see.
Yeah, we can look at that. No problem.
Perfect time.
Yeah.
We're getting to that point.
Yeah, how lovely.
Yeah, when you're thinking about it a bit more. It's hard to think about it when it's so little as well, isn't it? Good enough to digest. Thinking about it when food. Yeah, exactly.
We took in the alcohol and the use of carbs, so that was perfect.
Yeah, that's all we need, yeah. Exactly. Alright, well, good luck everybody. For those introducing Sold soon, I hope it goes well tomorrow.
Oh, you're doing it tomorrow?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Have you brought your food?
Yeah, this is brown rice cereal. So yeah, I'm just thinking how am I going to start off the
I think it's a really good one to start with.
yeah, because I was like, because over the instruction was saying that you need about 4 to 5 tablespoons of breast milk. I'm like thinking, my breast milk is in my fridge. So how am I going to, to dissolve it with the cereal? I need to warm up. So how warm is the breast milk must be in order for it to dissolve with the thing? Okay, let me try out.
I would honestly use a teaspoon or 2 of the rice cereal, and then just a teaspoon or 2 of the
then the texture, how much is the texture?
You do want it quite runny. They're not going to be able to sort of handle anything too solid. Yeah, you don't want it like breast milk because that's hard to feed with a spoon, but just a bit less runny than breast milk really. Yeah, and it's an easy, slow kind of transition.
Yeah.
You can always do food as well, and what's a good thing to do is just combine the two, combine the carrot and the rice.
The carrot I need to blend it first.
Steam